G'day friends, welcome back to the OFFbit. On this episode of the OFFbit, we're going to be exploring the AMD Phenom 2 955 Black Edition. We've paired this CPU with the ATI Radeon hd5770. We're going to be running the usual benchmarks and we're going to crack it through a few games. Let's see how this puppy handles. AMD Phenom 2 955 Black Edition. Released back in 2009, either in April or December, depending on the SKU. This 4-core CPU is based off the Deneb core and runs on the 45nm node. Default clock is running at 3.2 GHz and runs off a multiplier of 16 times. Now, the Black Editions do have unlocked multipliers, so this CPU can be overclocked by the multipliers. Now, the frontside bus, or known in AMD world as Hypertransport, runs at 2 GHz, holding 4 lots of 64 KB level 1 cache. It's got 4 lots of 512 KB level 2 cache and 6 meg of level 3 cache. This CPU will run on both the AM3 and AM2 Plus platform, supporting DDR3 or DDR2 memory. Now, this CPU is basically, I believe, made to compete with the Intel Core 2 quads of the time. Things like the Core 2 Quad Q9550. It also had the first generation of i5, i3s and i7s by Intel. AMD priced themselves a lot cheaper than the Intel counterparts. Now, being significantly cheaper at the time, AMD became the choice for many gamers and their gaming rigs. And this was the case for me back in the day. Today, the motherboard we are using is the Asus M4A88T-M/USB 3. This motherboard is an AMD AM3 platform motherboard. It can hold up to 16 gig of 4 DIMM DDR3 sticks. It also can support CPUs running 140 watt TDPs. Now today we're running 6 gig of DDR1333 RAM, so we got 3 sticks of 2 gig. Today the video card we'll be using is the ATI Radeon 5770. The particular version we're using today is the Gigabyte Super Overclock version with 1 gig of GDDR5 RAM. Jumping into the CPU synthetic benchmarks with 7-zip first. The AMD Phenom 2 pulled into second place, a fair bit behind the i7 950, but managed to beat all the other Core 2 quads that are in the list. Moving on to CPU Z from CPU ID. The Phenom 2 sort of did quite the opposite to our last test CPU Z. The Phenom 2 basically came in last place, only scored 157.1 points in the single core and 623 in the multi. It just shows you how much the AMD Phenom is a different beast compared to the Intel CPUs. In Cinebench R15, the AMD Phenom 2 955 Black Edition scored 325 points, which just left it lagging just behind the Xeon X5450 Core 2 quad. It would be interesting to see how much of a difference an overclock would make on this CPU. But alas, we did not do that today, but we'll be looking at that at a future video. So keep your eye out and subscribe to the channel if you want to see that video. Moving on to the GPU synthetic, we started off with Cinebench R15 once again. The hd5770 pulled in at 57 frames per second, lagging not too far behind the 5850 and pushed out in front of the GTX 570. Using the Unigine Heaven engine, the hd5770 scored 350 points. Not completely sure what happened here, but it scored fantastically well, beating 570s, the 5850, the 6570. It beat pretty much everything but the GTX 750 and the slow PC. So I would probably just ignore that. There was something funny going on there, I think. Moving on to 3D Mark's Fire Strike, the hd5770 scored 1798. Now I usually find 3D Mark really does quite a good job of positioning GPUs where they sit, especially in the Fire Strike test. I can definitely say the 5770 does feel slower than a GTX 750, does feel slower than a GTX 570, HD 5850. Definitely, that looks exactly right to me. Anyway, that's from a gaming perspective. Talking about games, we're looking at our first game right now. This is Rocket League. Phenom 2 955BE married with the hd5770 ran this game silky smooth. Average frame rates we got for this game was 51.6 frames per second. Minimum frame rate fell at 39.6 frames per second. We maxed out at 67 frames per second, and our 0-1% lows was 17.7 frames per second. Like I said, this game ran perfect. You would have no issues. We're running this at 1920 by 1080 with pretty good graphic settings. So a definite pass for Rocket League. Moving on to PUBG. I felt that the hd5770 was holding back for this game. The AMD Phenom 2 955 Black Edition, I think, is probably capable of running this. Pairing it with a better video card would probably show you better results. Now, our average frame rate we got was 32.1 frames per second. We had minimum frame rates at 0.9 frames per second, which was the 0-1% low frame rate as well. We did max out at 60.7 frames per second. Now, this game, we did run at 720p, and we're also running at very low details. Now, the game for most of the time ran fairly good, usually sat around 30 frames per second, but it would dip, and it would usually happen when something critical is happening. Now, it was also very hard to aim with the guns in the game. Now, I don't know if there was a bit of an input lag that was happening or just the frame rate dropping, but there was difficulties with aiming. However, close lane RPGs, no problem. Now, I was playing a squad game here with just me in the squad. I was in a one-man squad versus whatever this squad was with 4 guys. I gave them a hard time. Didn't kill them, but I'm pretty sure I annoyed them pretty well. Moving on to Sea of Thieves by Rare. Running this at cursed settings at 1080p. This game was definitely playable, but it did dip out from time to time. But I think just how this game plays, it probably won't hurt you too badly. And saying that, let's get to the frame rate. So our average frame rate is 49.6 frames per second. Our minimums were 18.6 and our maximums were 67 frames per second. The 0.1% lows fell to 6.7 frames per second. So all in all, not great, but not too bad either. Now, if you do have a system like this and you want to give this game a go, now I do know that Microsoft do have a PC Game Pass that they're running at the moment, and it's usually about $1 Australian. And I think after the first month it moves up to like $5 or $6. So it's probably not a bad way just to try a few games out if you have an older system. In Fortnite, we ran this in the 720p preset with low settings. For most part of the game, it ran pretty good. Did come with a couple of dips here and there, but like I said, ran pretty good. So the average frame rate for Fortnite was 59.0 frames per second. Our minimums fell at 14.9 frames. The maximums was 81.4. Our 0.1% lows was at 2.7 frames per second. And that would have been those loadings, just a couple of things. So they were those dips I was talking about that were kind of problematic at times, but not too bad. GTA 5 ran pretty good. We did run this in 1920 by 1080p. I think it was in DirectX 10 mode. And most of the settings were set to off or normal. So pretty low settings. As an overall experience, quite enjoyable. Played pretty much perfectly fine in my thoughts. Now I know the game looks like it's plagued with bad driving, but that's nothing on the video card or the CPU. So our average frame rate for GTA 5 was 51.2 frames per second. The minimums fell to 32.4 frames per second and the maximums at 83.3 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows with 23.9 frames per second. So sum up this game, it's a pass for the hd5770 on the AMD Phenom 2955 Black Edition. Moving to the next game, Valorant. Now Valorant runs pretty smooth. In fact, I don't think there's too many PCs this game won't run on unless it's missing instruction sets. So Valorant's average frame rate was 77.7 frames per second. Our maximum frame rate hit 107.6 frames per second. Now we did have a few dips, but for the most it wasn't noticeable. So our 0.1% lows was 3 frames per second. 1% lows set around about 29.7. So all in all, if you want to play Valorant on this system, it's a definite good to go. Last game of the day. Okay, we're trying out a new game today. This is called Genshin Impact. It's made by, now I'm going to try and say this, MyHoYo is the developer and publisher for this game. Now I've got a few friends playing this game at the moment. It seems to be quite popular. It is a beautiful game and just has a very nice play style to it. Now you can see there's a bit of glitching going on with this, so I think we're running out of VRAM. So if you got 1 gig of VRAM, just try and wade your way through the options and turn the graphics settings down, and after that, all your glitching problems should be gone. So with the details and the graphics wound back and running at 1920 by 1080p, the game gave us an average frame rate of 42.3 frames per second. Minimum sat at 28.9 frames per second and the maximum was 55.8 frames per second. The 0.1% lows was at 5.4 frames per second. So look, all in all, this game ran perfectly fine on this hardware setup. Now the hd5770 is probably the thing that's holding it back the most. The CPU by itself was doing absolutely fine. As you can see that the loads on all the cores was about 60% on average overall. So if you're planning to play this game on this system, it's a big win. It's a lovely game. It is so pretty. I think you'll sink hours into this game and you won't even know you're playing from a system that was basically coming from the year 2009. Now, as I do like to wrap this up, so the AMD Phenom 2 955 Black Edition, still not a bad CPU. There's still a lot of headroom. I haven't even seen what it can do overclocking wise. And the Black Edition is the version that we've got here at the moment, which is going to be even better for overclocking. Now in regards to the ATI hd5770, now I think this card is definitely holding this system back. I would like to try my GTX 750 in this CPU, or maybe my GTX 570. I've got a couple of them laying around, so they would probably be a nice card to marry up with it. But for the time being, this is all I know. So that hd5770 probably needs an upgrade. Now, just going to make a shout out to, I think it's Stanley, STNLY, who's part of our nice little community that we have here at the OFFbit. Now, he requested that I'd run a hd5770 and run it with Genshin Impact. So I wanted it to be on an AMD Athlon 2 quad core. So the closest I had sitting in my cupboard of bits and bobs was the Phenom 2 955 Black Edition. So keep an eye out, we're going to be doing more videos with the AMD Phenom 2 Black Edition. Alright, well that's us for the OFFbit today. And if you want to join our little community, it's quite simple. Just start chatting in the comments, hit the subscribe button. I plan to keep on making lots of videos. Now, if you guys got any suggestions or things you want me to test, just drop it by and I'll see what I've got and I'll give it a crack. Now, if you've liked this video today, please hit that like button. Well, I'm signing out now. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time on the Offbit.